Mark has said, and freedom, and just to know that we can come here freely and lift our hands. I've had opportunity to be in some countries where that's not necessarily the case. Actually, years ago, many moons ago, when the Iron Curtain fell in Russia, was on one of the first teams in there, and the hunger for God was just unbelievable, because they didn't know the freedom that we know, and just to be able to stand and speak your mind and know that men and women just like us risk their lives for that. And I so appreciate that you guys, veterans in this place, what a God gift to America, and what a God gift to us. And I just want to thank you one more time before I begin the message. I want to show you guys a picture before I get started. I like visuals, and so this is a picture of Tehran, Iran. It's the Golden Royal Palace there. And what's interesting about this is I was reading and just looking up examples for the message this morning. I was reading about this place, and it's beautiful. It's got all these entrances, and you can tell in the picture that the glass is kind of broken. As one enters this palace, you can see all of the mirrors and stuff in this room. When the royal palace was being planned, they commissioned people. The architects commissioned people in Paris, and what they wanted to do was they wanted to cover this place with mirrors. And unfortunately, when the mirrors arrived and they began to unpack at the palace as they're building this palace, they opened the crates and the mirrors were broken. And they took the look at the crates, and all the broken pieces are falling out, and they were all smashed up while being transported. And so they were going to throw these pieces away and just recommission some more. But one of the guys working on the building said, hey, let's just take this and try to fit it back together and put it up like that. And so in the process of putting it up like that, the result is this beautiful room where all of the little imperfections and all of the little cracks make the room, when the sun's shining through, just sparkle like diamonds and rainbows. And that was out of a result of brokenness, of broken pieces. That's exactly what God does and can do with brokenness in our lives. This guy, this architect, that when he saw these broken mirrors, he must have knew that. He must knew that good things can come from brokenness. We live in a messed up world, and there's so much going on, and there's so many hurting people, truly hurting people from all kinds of circumstances. In a world where we tend to, when things get broken and dirty, people just want to discard them, and they just want to throw them out. We no longer need these things. We just want to throw away the damaged goods, and we want to reject those damaged goods. People are broken every day, and in relationships, they get broken every day. Feelings get hurt, marriages tear apart, and friendships tear apart, families tear apart every day. And in addition to people, there's just circumstances that just come and they enter our lives, and for no reason at all, and they break us. The loss of a job, this economy, maybe someone in your family gets sick with cancer or some terminal illness, a loss of a loved one, a death of a loved one. There's so many things that happen today that bring us, it seems, to our knees. And what the world sees as broken, though, what people see as broken, I believe that God sees as something beautiful. And I think that, that we have to Think about that. When the world rejects things, God doesn't reject them. He just looks at it and begins his masterpiece work. And if you guys want to turn to, I'm going to be using Psalms 51, verses 10 through 17. While you're turning there, I just want to give you a little background on this psalm and where it's at and what we're experiencing here. This is written by David, and it's written by David, the Psalms 51, in a time of his life when he was perhaps the most broken he could ever be. And we all know his mistake with Bathsheba, and he wound up costing someone's life. It cost him a lot too. But and so this psalm is written in that place of brokenness. And so if you'll read with me, Psalms 51, 10 through 17, I read from the New Living Translation, but it just says this. It says, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, renew a loyal spirit within me. Do not banish me from your presence, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and make me willing to obey you. Then I will teach your ways to the rebels, and they will return to you. Forgive me for shedding blood, O God who saves, and then I will joyfully sing of your forgiveness. Unseal my lips, O Lord, that my mouth may praise you. You do not desire a sacrifice, or I would offer one. You do not want a burnt offering. The sacrifice you desire is a broken spirit." And I just want to speak for the next few minutes to you guys on from brokenness to beautiful. Truly, David was in a place of his life where he was totally broken down. And we all know, in the end, we get the privilege of knowing the end of the story. At that point, David didn't, but we get the privilege of knowing the end of the story. And we know that David was one of the greatest heroes and kings in the Bible. But in this moment in time, David, he got it. He understood what brokenness was, and to come to a place in your life where circumstances throw you there and all you can do is depend on God. He knew that in brokenness it would be abandoning his own abilities and fully relying on God. He knew that that would be the only thing that brought him out, was fully relying on God. Now also, he knew that a broken spirit, a broken person knows that God should be the only goal. God should be the only desire. So he abandoned his selfish goals. And he also knew that giving up his will was the only way to success. Now, in our toughest moments in life, that's when we let God shine, and when we fully rely on God, that is when we truly release His Spirit to shine. See, when we're forced to only rely on God, then it's through faith that He can do some incredible, amazing things. Now, there's a lot of examples in the Bible on faith and fully relying on God. And so I was looking for another example that we could look to just to bring this point out, that we need to fully rely on God. And another favorite story in the Bible of mine is found in a couple of chapters. When you get home, if you want to check it out, it's in Judges 6 through 8. And that's the story of Gideon. In this story, guys, the Israelites found themselves in a totally broken place. The Israelites, guys, had been pillaged and plundered, and they were left to ruins. And the Midianites were ruling over these Israelites. Well, God had a plan, even in this broken time, for these Israelites. And we know the story of Gideon. God called Gideon to take on this grand Midianite army of 135,000 men strong. Now, boys and girls, can y'all tell me, and I'm putting myself on the line here by saying this, how many men did Gideon bring into that army? Do we remember? It wasn't 135,000. It was a few hundred. I heard a number, but I'm not going to repeat it because it's wrong. Try 300, guys. We haven't had that story in a while. But anyway, God dwindled Gideon's army down to 300 men, and he gave Gideon a plan. And I think when God gave Gideon this plan, and even in the process of this army going down to 300 men, Gideon really had to fully rely on God in this broken time here, because this plan that God comes up with is just, it's not charge or anything. It's like go into at night and you have the vessels and put the light under the vessels and then wait for a certain time, break the vessels and sound the trumpets. And so it was a kind of a crazy plan, but Gideon fully relied on God, and through fully relying on God in that time of when nothing else could work, because I gotta rely on God because I sure can't do it on my own, then something happened. They had the great victory that night. And, it's in our faith that God can truly begin to work. It's when we, just like Gideon, begin to look at our circumstances and it could be like a totally hopeless situation that you have no idea how you're going to make it or no idea how you're going to survive this situation and move on. But it's in that total hopelessness that with faith that God knows what he's doing, that God begins to release his spirit, and he begins to release his resources. And how many knows God owns it all? He owns it all. So he begins to release his resources and begins to release his powers to work on our behalf. So brokenness requires just total, full faith, relying on God. But brokenness also takes it if a totally broken person, a little step further. We fully rely on God, but brokenness also brings us to the knowledge that God is the only worthwhile goal. Stacy can have a lot of lofty goals and a lot of lofty dreams. Truly, the only lofty goal, the only true goal that we need in life is not about, can I get this promotion in my job? And it's not even about, can I see that my, maybe in a child's life, can I get this position on the football team? It's not about that. It's about, I'm going to look to you, God. And God, if it's not your will, then you'll give me something better. Matthew 6:33 says these words. We all know this is a very familiar verse to us, but it says that, but seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you as well. So like in the case of David, sometimes in our own choices, that's brought us to brokenness. But when we put God first and make him the primary desire of our lives and our hopes and our dreams, he is then able to work in our lives and begin, they talk about weaving a masterpiece of a quilt, and these beautiful quilt works and stuff, and just the masterpiece of our lives. But, many times we're hesitant, though, to seek after God and to give up our desires, and because we're afraid of what we might lose. Well, if I give up this desire for this, God, I might not get to keep this, and I don't know, God, and so we battled that against. I don't want to. I might lose something, but whatever we may lose, whatever thing is temporary here, anyway, and so whatever we may lose, totally totally fails in comparison to what God can do for us, to what we can gain from him. Everything that we need in this life, every need that we have in this life is provided for us, and he provides it for us because he loves us. And when we put him first and we seek him first, he begins to just love on us and begins to work in our situation and begins to work in that circumstance. And a verse I quoted a lot, but it's just one of my favorites. And forgive me, I think I might even quoted it last time, but Romans 8:28 just says that we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those that love the Lord and who are called according to his purpose in them. God works every circumstance out for our good. Doesn't say for what we like, doesn't say, but he works it out for our ultimate good. And so we have to just trust and believe that. And just like when David was in that circumstances, he, cried out to God, God, give me your heart, give me a clean heart, and I want to seek after you. You don't require an offering, God. You want that broken spirit. And when we are broken to a point where we lose all selfish desires and we truly desire God, it's when then he can begin to make things beautiful. There's a verse in John 12:24, and it just says that I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat is planted in the soil and it dies, it remains alone. But its death will produce many new kernels, a plentiful harvest of life. I'm not a farmer, but I pretended to be this summer when I planted a couple of plants. But that the very life of the seed is not that outer part of the seed. It's the life that lies in the inner part of the seed. And so it's only when that outer part breaks away, that outer part begins to decay, that outer part begins to just fall apart, and the inner part begins to be released, that beautiful plant can come out and can be what it truly is meant to be. So the life of the seed, it truly lies in the inside of it. And when it's broken down and that embryo springs forth, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And sometimes at our lowest point in life, God, He's about to breathe new things into our lives. And I think I know that God has incredible plans for everyone in this room. And He wants and desires for each of us to be used mightily in the kingdom. And so the devil himself throws these circumstances our way so that we might be detoured a little bit. But if we throttle down and look to God and begin to believe in His will for our lives, then we can get back on the plan for God. And it's not about the circumstances that we're in, but it's just about what God desires of us. And sometimes at the lowest point, God, when He does breathe that life into us, our flesh, it just has to be broken in order for God to surface, and in order for that Spirit of God to be beautiful inside. There's nothing more beautiful than a plant, in the springtime, peeking its head out, or a flower or something like that. It's a beautiful thing. And there's a person, a good testimony, and when I was looking and I saw, I don't know if you guys in the room are familiar with Joni Eareckson Tada, but she has a beautiful testimony, and her testimony is that when she was young, she was in a diving accident, and that diving accident left her paralyzed. And so she's a quadriplegic, and so that and most people would look at that and say, well, you're done. What good can you do? You're done. But she relied on God, and God has done some amazing things. She does beautiful ministries now by going to churches on motivational speakings. But she also is an artist, and she paints beautiful scenes with her mouth and a brush. Beautiful, beautiful scenes. And she truly has a great, great testimony. But when I was reading, I want to read a quote from one of her blogs, because this is pretty interesting. She really got it, and I just want to read straight from her quote. It just says that God uses brokenness. After all, Psalms 51 says, the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit and a contrite heart. Just think of all the times in the scripture that God broke things in order to bless others. It was not until Jacob's natural strength was broken, when his hip was wrenched in a wrestling match, that he came to the point where God could bless him in a powerful way. It was not until Gideon's 300 soldiers broke their jars that were in their hands, which symbolized brokenness in their lives, that the hidden light of the torches were able to shine and rout out the enemy. It was only after the poor widow broke the seal on her only remaining jar of oil and began to pour it out that God miraculously multiplied it to pay her debts and meet her needs. It was only after Mary broke her alabaster jar of perfume, destroying its usefulness and value, and the wonderful fragrance filled the house, and Jesus was honored. In fact, when Jesus took the 5 loaves of bread and broke them, that bread was multiplied to feed 5,000. And here's what touches me. This is her speaking. This is what I've learned from the devotional streams in the desert. Through the very process of loaves being broken, the miracle occurred. And sometimes in brokenness, miracles occur. And this is why when Jesus allowed his body to be broken and the spear that his inner life was poured out for the thirsty sinners to drink in love, Jesus knew that example too. And he took all that pain on the cross and every lash, every whip he took for us. And it was not until that sacrifice, that beautiful, beautiful sacrifice, total surrender to us, that Jesus' miracles and his grace was released for us in that. So God can take broken things and he can make them beautiful if we truly rely on him. He can make, if we make him our one desire, if we fully rely on him, and if we're totally unselfish and we're going to die to ourselves and say, Lord, not my will, but your will be done, then God is able to release a masterpiece in our lives. And while life may bring us to complete brokenness, God can bring us to complete beauty. And that's a great place to be, greater than we've ever imagined. There's been a lot of times in my own personal life that I've seen just total, it seems like you get to a place where you can't go any further and you're up against a wall. And I can remember in one circumstance in my life where I had just gotten what I thought was my dream job, and I was making more money than I ever made in my life, and I thought that it was the right, God, and I believe God was in it and God allowed it, but I'm telling you, I got to that dream job, and it was like, this feeling, just because number one, it kind of took me away from my desire, my love, my church, and so I would go in and sometimes I'd walk into the store and I'd just cry because I'd like, God, how did I even get here? Because I moved a few hundred miles away from home by myself, didn't even have a dog or a cat at the time, just me, and I was like, what can, God, I don't even know how we got here, but we're here. I moved from Gadsden, Alabama to Macon, Georgia, and I'm working as a pretty successful restaurant manager, but this isn't really how I thought it would end, and how I thought it would plan. And it's through that time that God hooked me up with a sweet lady, and I'm talk about her in a minute, but I just began to pray and talk with her, and then I went to talk with the pastor of the church, and we just began to believe God. And he at the time asked me actually to be his drama director. And so we worked, and it seemed like a very long time when we were working and praying, and I was trying to find something in that area that would allow me to go to church and do what he wanted me to do, and so we did that. Well, I find the job as Chick-fil-A manager, because they're closed on Sundays, and I was excited because it had been a little while, and we'd been talking back and forth, me and my pastor, and I was so excited, and I went into his office, and I met him. I said, you know what? I've got a job now that I can commit to you, because I don't want to commit anything that I can't give my full 100% to. But I have a job now that I can commit to you, and this is how I think we should start the drama team. And he looked at me and he's like, Stacy, sit down. And I'm like, great, I have just rearranged my entire life. And and Stacy's got to sit down now for this. But in that moment, guys, that is actually was a beautiful moment. That was my step into becoming a full-time children's pastor, because that's the day he offered me the children's ministry. But boy, what a process. What a process of just sometimes just laying on your face and just saying, God, what is it we need to do? God desires to use all of us. And just like that kernel that is put in the ground, we all have fruits and we all have dreams that are waiting to blossom. And he wants to use us that way. Now, back to my lady that I met, and I called her my Mama Sarah. But she gave me, now this is an insight to you guys about me too. I love teacups. I love teacups and saucers. Y'all know my tea parties. Well, my love for that started with my Mama Sarah. She gave me, and I still have it sitting in my dining room, framed in her own handwriting, this beautiful poem and this teacup. And so I want to end with just by reading this and just encouraging us with this. But this is why I like teacups so well. And I hope that this poem, I didn't write it. I don't know who wrote it. But through this we can understand just the process of God wanting to do beautiful things in our lives. It says that there was a couple who used to go to England to shop in the beautiful stores. They liked antiques and pottery and especially teacups. This was their 25th anniversary. One day in this beautiful shop, they saw a beautiful teacup, and they said, "May we see that? We've never seen one quite so beautiful." And as the lady handed it to them, suddenly the teacup spoke. It said, "You don't understand," it said. "I haven't always been a teacup. There was a time when I was red and I was clay, and my master took me and he patted me and he rolled me over and over and over. And I yelled out, I said, 'Let me alone.' But he smiled and he said, 'Not yet.' And that was when I was placed on a spinning wheel." And the teacup said, "And suddenly I was spun round and around and around and around. I said, 'Stop it, I'm getting dizzy,' I screamed. But the master only nodded. And he said, 'Not yet.' Then he put me in the oven, and I never felt such heat. I wondered why he wanted to burn me. And I yelled, and I knocked on the door. I could see him through the opening, and I could read his lips as he shook his head. 'Not yet.' And finally the door opened, and he put me on the shelf, and I began to cool. 'That's better,' I said. And then he brushed and painted all over me. The fumes were horrible. I thought I would gag. Stop it, I cried. And he only nodded and he said, 'Not yet.' Then I knew that when there wasn't any hope and I wasn't going to make it, I was ready to give up. The door opened and he took me out and he placed me on the shelf. And then suddenly he put me back into the oven. And not like the first one. This one was twice as hot. And I knew that I would suffocate. And I begged and I pleaded and I screamed and I cried. All the time I could see him through that opening again. And he nodding his head, 'Not yet.' And I knew that there wasn't any hope. And I never would make it. And I was ready to give up. But the door opened. And he took me out and he placed me on the shelf this time. And 1 hour later, he handed me a mirror. And he said, 'Look at yourself.' And I did. And I said, 'That's not me. That couldn't be me. I'm beautiful. I'm beautiful.' And I want you to remember then, he said, 'I know it hurts to be rolled and patted, but if I'd have left you alone, you'd have dried up. And I know it made you dizzy to spin around the wheel, but if I'd stopped, you would have crumbled. And I know it hurt when it was hot and disagreeable in the oven, but if I hadn't put you there, you would have cracked. And I know that the fumes were bad when I brushed and painted all over you, but if I hadn't have done that, you'd have never have been hardened, and you would not have known any color in your life. And I haven't put you back in the oven the second time, you wouldn't have survived very long because the hardness would not have held. Now you're the finished product, and you and I had in mind, and you're my masterpiece. There's a lot of things that goes on in life, and we, just like the little teacup story, want to scream and shut the doors and just make the world go away. And but God says, through brokenness, I can do a beautiful thing. We look at David, who got into that one spot, and it was a horrible spot to be in. But he understood what it meant to cry out to God, and he understood what it meant to totally rely and totally give himself to God. And through that, God did beautiful things. And so today, I want to just end with just encouraging you guys. There's a lot of stuff that goes on out there in the world and in our lives, and I know, that it's just because the devil wants us to be detoured or sidetracked from the ultimate will of God. But if we, like David, fully rely on God, and we just put God as our ultimate goal, and we just die to ourselves and say, not me, God, but you, then God can release his power. And so I believe that in every person's life in this room, from the youngest to the oldest, there's still dreams. There's still beauty to be had. And so I just want to encourage you guys today as we leave to just, in times when things get, they say that saying, when things get tough, the tough get going. When things get tough, just lean to God and say, God, you are still God. And God, you never change. God never changes. And he's the same God that opened blind eyes and raised the dead and fed 5,000 is the same God that we serve today. And he's my Father. And he's going to do for me what he did for others. And if I rely on him, he takes care of me and gives me my ultimate best. And you your ultimate best. And you your ultimate best. And so I just hope that encouraged you guys this morning. I just want to